right, so let's just briefly review where we left off on Thursday. On Thursday, we were introducing the endocrine system. We introduced some new terminology about how multiple hormones act at our targets. We also differentiated between, what did we talk about? We looked at how multiple hormones work when present at a target. And then we talked about the difference between the posterior pituitary and the anterior pituitary anatomically. We haven't gotten into any hormonal pathways, with the exception of the pathway that we studied in lab for the release of thyroxine from the thyroid gland. So what I want to do is review the basic anatomy between the posterior and the anterior pituitary, and I'll move on to actual pathways. So what is the big difference between the posterior and the anterior pituitary? Nerves where? Posterior pituitary. And then the anterior pituitary. There is a vein connecting between the two. Between what two? Hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. So what type of tissue do we have in the anterior pituitary? Glandular tissue. Very good. Secreting hormones. What type of control does the hypothalamus have over the posterior pituitary? What type of control is that? It's not trophic. What were our three options? Neural, humoral, trophic. So the hypothalamus control of the posterior pituitary is neural. Why isn't it trophic control? We don't see a hormone in the mix. It's just directly neurohormone released from the posterior pituitary, released in the hypothalamus, gets excited, if you will. It generates an action potential. So I'd say it's neural control over the posterior pituitary. What about over the anterior pituitary? Trophic. Definitely the hypothalamus tropically regulates the anterior pituitary. And the reason we were okay with that is, one, we introduced it in lab last week, but as well as identified, there's a very well-developed, unique vascular system connecting the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. And we know that trophic hormones, neurohormones from the hypothalamus, get secreted in this hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system to target the anterior pituitary. And so we saw an example of this pathway. What was the example we saw in lab? Name a trophic hormone from the hypothalamus that targets the anterior pituitary. GHRH, thyrotropin-releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, targets the anterior pituitary. The response to the anterior pituitary is to release TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, which itself is a trophic hormone, which would go on and target the what? Thyroid gland. To release thyroxine. To have an effect, what effect? Enhance metabolism. Good. I got it. Good. What questions do you have over the basic anatomy between the hypothalamus, posterior pituitary, and anterior pituitary? Just questions. You might not. Is anybody at a point where they have no idea what to even ask? Well. The question was, there are endocrine cells in the anterior pituitary. Are there not any in the posterior pituitary? I want you to chew on that a little bit, and then I want you to answer the question. I want you to answer your own question. You can go 50-50, one or the other. Okay. You're correct. There are no endocrine cells in the posterior pituitary. It's just axon terminals, really, from the hypothalamus. And so as far as I know, there is no endocrine producing cells in the posterior pituitary. Good question. Are there any nerve cells in the anterior pituitary? No. One strictly neural, the other is strictly glandular and hormonal. But they're all joined together, called the pituitary. Good question. Additional questions? If I were to take this picture and flip it, rotate or whatever, flip it, if I were to flip this, would this now still be the anterior pituitary?
Yeah.
If I go like this, anterior pituitary, posterior pituitary. If I go like this, anterior pituitary, it's a mirror image is what I'm addressing. The orientation. So you can't always say the anterior pituitary. I've seen in my book, it's always on the left-hand side. That must be the anterior pituitary. Some other author may draw it on the right side. Someone may draw it lying down, sitting up, or whatever. And so a good way to differentiate is one, see if there's any blood vessels shown. Two, show if there's any axon terminals shown. But generally, the anterior pituitary is a little bit more protruding, I guess, in contrast to the posterior pituitary.
I thought the anterior that was in the front.
Right. And so I could draw the front over here. I could draw the front over here. I could do a headstand. I could draw, right?
But it's always the front of the person.
Right, on the front of the person, correct. But in all drawings, are all drawings the exact same? No. It's a three-dimensional structure. A lot of times people say, well, it's on the left, it's on the left. No, it's anterior, it's a drawing. I'll draw it different than you draw it. That's what I'm trying to illustrate. Did we get into any of the hormone pathways? Did we talk about oxytocin? A little bit. Well, let's just go through and review the posterior pituitary. The proper name for the posterior pituitary is called the neurohypophysis. Hypophysis is the name for the pituitary. Neuro tells us the posterior pituitary has what type of cells? Nerve cells. We identified last time that the posterior pituitary doesn't do any manufacturing of hormones, just storing in vesicles and releasing when activated by the hypothalamus. Just storage and release here at the posterior pituitary.
So it stores neurohormones?
Uh-huh. Stores neurohormones that were manufactured in the hypothalamus. We know that the nerve cell bodies are where the neurohormones are made, transported along the axons, stored in the terminals, which here we're calling the what? Posterior pituitary. The two neurohormones which are released from the posterior pituitary include a hormone called oxytocin, which you can abbreviate OT, and another one called antidiuretic hormone. You guys caught my typo last week, so antidiuretic hormone. It has an alternative. Everything's going to have an alternative name. You can call it this, you can call it that. Depends if you're studying a male, female, rat, dog, pig, sheep. Everything's going to have a bunch of different names. Just like you might have a bunch of different names in your family, mom, aunt, right, whatever the case may be. So I tried to caution you guys last week to avoid first learning the acronyms, but first learn the name. A lot of times if you learn the name, it'll tell you what it does. Most of the time, not always, but it'll give you a glimmer of something. So we gave an example of like antidiuretic hormone. Oxytocin is certainly a hormone which we've talked about before. And so what we're going to do is look at each of these hormones, reminding you we're going to look at the hormone release, its primary regulator or regulators, the primary targets, and the main functions. Are we going to talk about everything that these hormones do in both genders and are all stages of life? No. You'll really hate me if we did that, right? So we're going to look at some of the more well-characterized functions of these hormones. My abbreviation here, because it wouldn't all fit. Posterior pituitary, the hormone we're studying is oxytocin in my abbreviation. So if we look at oxytocin, how do you think it's regulated? How is it regulated?
Like when we need it.
Well,
It's being released all the time.
it's certainly going to be regulated by one of the three things. We said either, very good, I'm going to come back to you. We said our three options are? Sure. So trophic, neural, or humoral. So the question is, what's the regulation for the release of oxytocin? And we said it's coming from the posterior pituitary, so it has to be neural. Neural regulation, when we need it, because we're trying to maintain.
I was just trying to say, like, you don't release it all. Like, some hormones you release all the time.
Well,
But oxytocin, you get a big. Maybe I'm just making a joke.
Everything's going to be regulated to maintain homeostasis. Right. The degree and the rate depend. It may vary between morning and night. Okay. It may vary between the start of the month, the end of the month. If you think about like female reproductive cycle, it may vary between puberty and menopause or whatever. So not all hormones are just randomly leached, right, continuously. It's going to be controlled to maintain what? Homeostasis. We're saying, well, if it's controlled to maintain homeostasis, what's the major controller? We say oxytocin is going to be neural. Okay, the nervous system, the hypothalamus, will determine when it is released. Reminding you, we're looking at the major targets. We're not looking at everything. What do you think the major target for oxytocin is? The most famous target, the uterus, which is smooth muscle in the uterus. It also targets the smooth muscle in the mammary gland, right, in the breast tissue. Why do you think? For what most famous reason do you think oxytocin might target the smooth muscle in the uterus? Lactation, actually, milk ejection. Right. So getting the milk out, and birth, contractions. You call it parturition. So delivering a baby, for example, is when you'll see oxytocin in its greatest surge. So therefore, it promotes contraction of those two organs, and as identified indirectly a moment ago, it is definitely under a positive feedback mechanism. So elevated levels of oxytocin surge extra levels of oxytocin, which surge more oxytocin, which the whole point is to continue contractions, to deliver a baby, to deliver a placenta, to let down milk to feed a newborn baby. Once you have a baby, you're just going to have continuous oxytocin surge through the rest of your life. Uterus is never going to stop contracting. That would be horrific. Okay, so the answer is no. It's going to have, just like everything else, you got to get back into homeostasis.
So no one ever had that problem?
I'm sure anything's possible, right? As it happens, I don't know. If that happens, that means a doctor would go and give a blocker right, to it. Turn that off, that pathway off. Is oxytocin found in males? Yes. But do they have a uterus? No. Okay, but it can also target smooth muscle, the brain, etc. You'll continue to see a common pathway for each of these hormones, the regulator, target, functions, and feedback mechanisms. Before we move on, any questions about oxytocin? All right. Another posterior pituitary hormone is called antidiuretic hormone. Its proper name is vasopressin, and that's the term. The abbreviation is AKA, also known as vasopressin. I like antidiuretic hormones, so I go with antidiuretic hormones. It spells it out for me. What does it do? Promotes water retention. So it's an antidiuretic. You've probably heard of a diuretic, getting rid of water. So an antidiuretic would promote water retention. If you're retaining water, where do you think the target is? Kidney. Actually, the kidneys. So, and I'm getting ahead of myself. What do you think the regulator is? Neural, because we're in the posterior pituitary. So the hypothalamus, right, is going to regulate this. We said the primary target for antidiuretic hormone is the kidneys, which we'll see these hormones again in chapter, what is it, 18, 19, anyway, at the end of the semester when we look at the kidneys. We'll see this hormone again. You may not be aware, though, it also targets your smooth muscle. What is my abbreviation here? Blood vessels. It targets the kidneys to retain water. And in the blood vessels will constrict. When I keep water at my kidneys, what happens to my blood volume? I keep the water. I don't filter it out, so it stays in my blood, so my blood volume will go up. And then I squeeze on that blood volume. What do you think is going to happen? If I've got increasing volume and I'm decreasing the area around it, what's going to happen? Blood pressure is going to go up to set point. So you'll see antidiuretic hormone being released when your blood solutes are high. So when your blood solutes are high, or maybe your water volume is low, or maybe even your blood pressure is low. Let's just add those. I didn't want this slide to get much more text heavy than it is. Okay, so it does promote water retention at our kidneys. It causes the blood vessels to constrict. When that happens, we said our blood volume goes which way? Up, back to set point, not above set point. And we're squeezing on that blood, so our blood pressure also goes up to back to set point. So for example, after class you run over to McDonald's and you get some of their fries and you ask for some extra salt and you get their fried chicken sandwich. And what else do you got in there? Some chicken nuggets. What's a chicken sandwich? You get some fried chicken nuggets.
The chicken is only like this big.
After that meal, in addition to a bunch of other stuff, your solutes levels are going to rise. Your blood pressure is going to rise because we're going to, right, many reasons, but antidiuretic hormone is going to be released to retain water to try to dilute out all that salt basically in your blood. Blood volume will go up. Blood pressure will go up. What else will you do? You just had that meal.
Fats get stored.
Yes, that'll happen too. Guilt will ensue. Yes. One day night. What else am I going to want to go for?
Shake.
Something to drink. In addition, we could add this here. Not only do we keep water at the kidneys, but you ever felt thirsty? If you ever felt thirsty, this hormone is in your blood telling you, we need water. Our solutes are too high. Our water is too low, so I should drink water to bring my solutes and water back to separate.
So in a diabetic, is that what's causing, or is it just a lack of insulin?
There's many different types of diabetes, and so in that case, their solutes are elevated, and they're not able to transfer the solutes from the blood to the tissues to store, and so yeah, the thirst mechanism is activated, even the urine output goes up. I mean, it's disease.
But it's not that that's doing it, it's something else.
Antidiuretic hormone is probably involved, but it's indirect. It's going to be more your the lack of the insulin being able to do its work, which hopefully we'll talk about insulin today. Additional questions? So antidiuretic hormone targets the kidneys. Maybe put a star here. We're going to see this in the endocrine, in the renal system. It directly promotes what? At the kidneys, water retention. So we're going to see some aquaporins active at the kidneys when necessary. Those are the two neurohormones released from the posterior pituitary. That's going to now transition us to the much more complex relationship between the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary, or the trophic hormones there. Just to remind you, hypothalamus releases trophic hormones into that portal vein, which target the anterior pituitary, which releases a bunch of other hormones. And so hormone overload may be happening in just a moment. I'm going to try to present it to you so it's not so overwhelming, but it certainly can be if you're not keeping up with the text. The hypothalamus releases way more than just TRH to cause the anterior pituitary to release TSH. The relationship is that the hypothalamus produces how many neurohormones? 7 neurohormones that go into the portal vein to target the anterior pituitary to release how many hormones? 6. 6 hormones from the anterior pituitary, which go into the general circuit to target basically the rest of the body. So we're going to see trophic hormone, anterior pituitary, and its hormone, and then some other target. So it can be complex if you let it, but we can say these hormones from the anterior pituitary are at least controlled how? Tropically. Prolactin, at least controlled tropically. Thyroid stimulating hormone, at least controlled tropically. ACTH, at least controlled tropically. Growth hormone, at least controlled tropically. Our gonadotropins also at least controlled tropically. But there's some exceptions where they have this and other types of controllers over them. So before I move on, what questions do you have about how the hypothalamus can produce trophic hormones, secrete them into the little portal system to target the anterior pituitary? Are you okay how the hypothalamus tropically regulates the anterior pituitary? Oh, in this last image, some of our anterior pituitary hormones are also trophic, targeting endocrine gland, endocrine gland, endocrine gland, endocrine gland. We can still see those continued this and that and this and that type of pathway. So for your reference, this should be figure 6.5 in your textbook. The first hormone we're going to look at is called prolactin. And prolactin will fall into the category of a non-trophic hormone. I would say prolactin is not trophic, so it targets something that's not what? Not an endocrine gland, right? Something that doesn't produce other hormones. Very good. I would say it's non-trophic. And that's why I'm going to kind of lead off with this one. How do you think it's regulated? Tropically by the hypothalamus. Very good. So the release of prolactin is under tropic control from the hypothalamus. You read ahead. What are the trophic regulators from the hypothalamus that regulate the secretion and inhibition of prolactin? Yeah, you can look on your handout if you've got it. Do I have it on there? Oh, nope. Not on it. What do you think regulates, go to figure 6.5. What do you think regulates the release or inhibition of prolactin? Something, oh, the name is awful, right? It's called prolactin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus causes the release of prolactin. Prolactin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus promotes the release of prolactin.
So is that the regulator or something?
Mm-hmm. It's tropically regulated by prolactin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. Promotes the release of prolactin. There is an antagonistic hormone to prolactin releasing hormone. What's it called?
Inhibiting.
Prolactin inhibiting hormone. Can you handle that, right? It stops the release of prolactin. So there's two antagonistic tropic hormones from the hypothalamus that promote the release or inhibition of prolactin. Okay, I do have it. So these two, make a note about these two. These two, where did I say they are? What's one another? Antagonistic. One stimulates the release, the other inhibits the release of prolactin. As the nomenclature, the hormone that causes the release of prolactin, or the other one that causes a hormone that causes the inhibition of prolactin. Where do you think the primary target for prolactin is? Mammary glands in the female. Is it the only target for prolactin? No, because who else has prolactin? Men, right? Okay, so it's the most famous, I guess, target for prolactin is the mammary glands for milk letdown production. Okay. So just you can say mammary glands. Okay. The function is to do what? Produce and release milk. Because prolactin also targets, what is this abbreviation? Smooth muscle. So not only just the synthesis of the milk, but the release of the milk as well. Lactation.
What are lactotropes?
Cells that make milk. Milk producing cells. So clearly what is tropically regulated from the hypothalamus. Then we can back up the hypothalamus. It's going to release in a feedback mechanism. If you've ever been a lactating female, you know, just a simple neural reflex like seeing a baby or hearing a baby, a crying baby especially, okay? Or talking about a baby, okay? Or smelling anything that can activate the brain. You think baby? What's happening? You're going to Walmart right before your 11 o'clock class about to start.
Start swelling up.
Do what? Right, milk, right, let down. It's a quick, right, nervous system causes this, right, trophic, right, pathway, and it's fast. All right, so prolactin is probably most well characterized with the female, as well as oxytocin. What else? Let's move on to another hormone which you are familiar with, which is called thyroid-stimulating hormone. Anybody remember the alternate name for this hormone? We covered in lab last week. You have a quiz? What's the other name for a TSH? No, you're correct. It is not thyroxine. Thyrotropin. Okay, very good. Thyroid stimulating hormone. You could say all that, or we could just give it the suffix tropin, which tells it's a hormone that targets another gland. In this case, the gland is the thyroid gland. So, thyroid stimulating hormone targets the, I'm going to get ahead of myself. How do you think we're going to regulate TSH? Tropically. From the hypothalamus, which hormone? Change your first term. Thyrotropin, releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, can activate the release of thyroid stimulating hormone from the anterior pituitary. The target for TSH is the thyroid gland. You should be able to tell me the function of this hormone as well. To tell the thyroid gland to release thyroxine. What do you think might cause this pathway to become activated? Metabolism is becoming lower, and our existing blood levels of thyroxine are also probably below set point. So directly we could say declining blood thyroxine levels monitored by the hypothalamus, but then if we were to measure metabolism, it too would be slightly suppressed. TSH is trophic itself, and so we're going to keep seeing the pathway when we look at the control of thyroxine from the hypothalamus. Kind of builds, if you will. The big thing is to see the relationship between the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary at this point. Are we okay so far? Another hormone from the anterior pituitary. The name will kind of overwhelm you if you let it, so try not to. ACTH. Do I know what that one is? Adrenocorticotropin hormone. And you're right, it's really going to target the what? Adrenal cortex. So ACTH, you can call it adrenocorticotropin. I've capitalized where the nomenclature comes from, an abbreviation. You can call it adrenocorticotropin, or you could just call it corticotropin. Either way. I like to throw in the adrenal, so we're talking about the adrenal cortex. Adrenocorticotropin hormone, ACTH. Is a hormone from where? Where are we at? No, ACTH, we are in the anterior pituitary. So ACTH from the anterior pituitary targets the adrenal cortex. Can y'all see the number? Adrenal glands. They themselves are next to the kidneys. ACTH comes from the anterior pituitary. How do you think it's controlled? Tropically by the hypothalamus. Which hypothalamic hormone causes the release of ACTH from the anterior pituitary? Corticotropin releasing hormone. Very thankfully, otherwise, can you imagine? Oh, okay. So the CRH stands for corticotropin releasing hormone. From the hypothalamus, targets the anterior pituitary to release, you say corticotropin, adrenocorticotropic hormone. You can call it ACTH. It's getting released when the hypothalamus releases corticotropin releasing hormone. You may hopefully see a trend as well that our hypothalamic trophic hormones are releasing hormones or inhibiting hormones. Have you seen that consistency? It's something releasing hormone, something releasing hormone. Okay. Hopefully you've seen that consistency as well. As identified, adrenocorticotropic hormone does target the adrenal cortex, the outer portion of the adrenal gland. What it does is tell the adrenal cortex to produce its own hormones. And there's a multitude of hormones which come from the cortex, and we're just going to call them, for consistency at this point, we're going to call them corticosteroids. So the adrenal gland makes different types of steroids, releasing from the cortex.
So it doesn't matter if we call it adrenocorticotropic, like the book does, or is it tropin?
Adrenocorticotropic hormone, no. Or corticotropin, no. As long as you don't call it the, as long as you're not, where you could not make a substitution. Corticotropin releasing hormone is very much different than just corticotropin. The releasing hormone is different than the actual hormone. Right. So that substitution, no. If we look at the feedback for adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, there's a few different feedback mechanisms that are well characterized. And existing levels of steroids from the adrenal gland can activate it, as well as just the hypothalamus can activate this pathway. Glucocorticoids are, Boyd tells us, steroids from the cortex that has something to do with sugar. Okay, so we'll get to those when we get to the adrenal cortex. But existing levels of hormones, steroids, and then the hypothalamus stress. I mean, the adrenal cortex is quite complex, and so we'll address it separately. But before we can look at the cortex, we got to see one of the stimulators, and that's by the way of ACTH from the anterior pituitary, which is regulated how? Tropically by the hypothalamic corticotropin releasing hormone. So ACTH is definitely tropic, so we'll get back into that when we look at the adrenal cortex itself properly. Another hormone from the anterior pituitary is called growth hormone, abbreviated GH. Its proper name, though, is somatotropin. So it's probably tropic to the body, promoting growth, enhancing. If I want to grow, I need more Well, growth hormone itself, and at the cells, it probably promotes. If I need to grow, what needs to increase?
Oh, that,
The amount of cells you
no,
have.
that,
Maybe, not necessarily, but maybe.
fuel.
Nutrients, right? Metabolism. So it's like another metabolic hormone. So how do we control it first? Tropically, from the hypothalamus, probably a hormone called growth hormone, releasing hormone, causes the release of growth hormone. On release growth hormone, hypothalamus releases growth hormone, releasing hormone. But this one also has an antagonistic tropic hormone from the anterior, from the hypothalamus. What's the antagonistic hormone to growth hormone releasing hormone? Probably growth hormone inhibiting hormone. Stops the release of.
So are those the regulators?
The regulators, we said how? Tropically, from the hypothalamus, releasing two antagonistic hormones called growth hormone releasing hormone. Activates the pathway. Growth hormone inhibiting hormone inhibits the pathway. What do you think the major targets for growth hormone are? Yes, the body, right? So what about the body can grow and increase metabolism? Bones, cartilage, what else? Muscles, nerves can't grow so much. They can a little bit. The liver is going to be another tropic pathway. So I won't go down that one yet. Your bones can grow, your muscles, skeletal muscles can grow. What do we need? We said to grow, we need energy. And so our fat cells can respond to growth hormone. What do you think your fat cells do? If I'm growing, my fat cells, they're breaking down, metabolizing, right? Lipolysis. My muscle cells are increasing in size. My bone cells might be increasing in size. So our major targets for growth hormone include, we just said our bones. What else? Skeletal muscle, and, some cartilage, and fat tissue, right? Are the major targets, not the only targets, as identified a moment ago. If we were to look at the function at the bones, the muscles, the fats, and the liver, and apply our metabolic terms like we used early in the semester, what were the two terms we could use for metabolism? We said reactions are either, what do we call it? Catabolic or anabolic. What do you think growth hormone, what type of effect does growth hormone have on bones? We would say that is anabolic. On muscle, skeletal muscle, you would call it anabolic. Fat, you would call it catabolic. Very good. So you could say those are the functions. I'll address the liver in just a moment. You would say it's protein anabolic at the muscle, and also anabolic at your bones. Fat catabolic. But as identified, it also targets the liver, and it's tropic. Might want to add a note there. At the liver, it's trophic, because the liver can release a hormone called insulin-like growth factor. Just identify it. It's a whole other pathway. But the name tells you it's insulin-like growth factor, so it also promotes growth, right? Uptake of nutrients so cell can grow, metabolize.
What did you say IGF is?
It's a hormone. Insulin-like growth factor is a hormone.
Insulin growth factor.
IGF is called insulin-like growth factor. You can just say IGF. I'm not going to ask you this pathway. Growth hormone, you'll see it surge during when do you think you would see a nice surge of growth hormone? During puberty. During puberty, right. You'll see it pre-pubertal, you'll see it pubertal, right, enhancing. But will you see it after puberty? You do. Okay. That's what maintains your tissues. But once you become in the geriatric stage, growth hormone levels decrease and your muscles become atrophy maybe or weaker, your bones brittle, etc. So, yeah. It's avalism. Atrophy. All right, so growth hormone, fan of that. I've got a question for you guys. Has anybody supplemented growth hormone? Anybody severe muscle competitors? People dope on growth hormone. Why would someone want to dope with growth hormone?
Oh, the book said because they could get 5 to 20% more lean body mass.
We just said it as fat, anabolic, and protein anabolic. So muscle gaining, right? Fat burning, muscle gaining. Let's go get some growth hormone. Right? So we can have. Is it a good idea to buy some growth hormone on the internet and start shooting up?
I wouldn't buy anything.
Shop for it. You will find it. Okay? Don't do it. Okay? Because if you don't use it under, this will apply to all the hormones. If you don't use it under medical advisement, you may become what? Well, we want to be in set point. You start doping with it, you become.
Oh, you might become like this guy on the last.
Well, your set point will stay the same, and so what will rise? The actual levels will rise. What happens if you have too much growth hormone? Your body may stop making it. If you give yourself too much, what even happens? So if we have too much of something, we have a
Shutdown.
over disease, right? We talked about hypersecretion of hormones, right? So we would have excessive levels of growth hormone. Excessive levels of growth hormone after puberty, what happens? Acromegaly.
Yeah.
You heard of that?
Acro, you said?
Acromegaly. It's a form of gigantism, but you become disproportionate. Long nose, long fingers, everything is just this.
It's all your cartilage.
Cartilage extends, the bones, right at the end of right where the cartilage is, they extend. Right.
So now and then you see a person with like one huge leg compared to the other. Is that?
That is not acromegaly. That's a circulatory system, most likely a circulatory system condition, or edema, something like that.
Oh.
So where I was going is if you hit puberty and your bones, right, epiphyseal plates have closed, and then you give excessive growth hormone, the ends of the bones will grow, and then it's not controlled, right? And it's a very debilitating disease. Anybody is susceptible to it. You may have normal growth now, and then, right, at some point in the near future, pituitary tumor, growth hormone, acromegaly, early death. So, not good.
Early death, you said?
Yeah, it can be fatal. Early youth. Everything just is excessive. Fast forward, if you will. So don't do it. All right, growth hormone, good stuff. We need it. There's another set of hormones from the anterior pituitary called, first is called luteinizing hormone. LH, luteinizing hormone. I want you to write this about this hormone. I may have it coming up, I'm not sure. Luteinizing hormone is one of two gonadotropins. These hormones target the gonads. There's actually two of them. One of them is called luteinizing hormone. So it's not called gonadotropin, it's a one of two gonadotropins. Does that make sense? If I were to talk about luteinizing hormone, I would say luteinizing hormone specifically. Its name isn't very descript, unless you maybe had some midterm. Does anybody know the lutein?
Use that.
I know it gives you a color. Has to do with a color.
White.
Not white. Yellow. Has something to do with yellow. You're like, why? Huh? Not liver. Because it is something to do with it. You don't have to write this down. I'm just going to give you the history of it really quickly. Luteinizing hormone was originally characterized in females. Females have which gonad? Ovaries. When a woman ovulates, it's basically like a nice ovary. Egg ruptures. You have a big hole, basically, where the rupture site was. In that hole, this thing called a yellow body grows, a corpus luteum, Cl. Ever heard of the Cl? So luteinizing hormone has something to do with the yellow body. So it got its name from the female. It was characterized there, but certainly is it found in the male? Yes. And it was called differently in the male. It used to be called, you want to know its name?
Yeah.
Interstitial cell stimulating hormone. Yeah. So we're like, let's just go with luteinizing hormone. That's easy. So luteinizing hormone is a hormone. It targets the gonads. We're still in the anterior pituitary, so the hormone is still trophic. The hormone that regulates it, though, is called, what do you think GN stands for? Gonadotropin releasing hormone. Gonadotropin is abbreviated G. It's lowercase n. So I'm going to guess that's significant. Gonadotropin.
Luteinizing hormone, what causes the release of an egg?
Yes.
Okay.
And we'll look at it also properly. It triggers ovulation. So gonadotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus tells the anterior pituitary to release luteinizing hormone. We're at it right now, actually, so we're going to. We are. The luteinizing hormone, the targets, as the name implies, would be the gonads, the female ovaries, and the male testes. In the female, as identified, its target is the ovary for maturation of an egg to get ready for ovulation, and it actually initiates ovulation. So it's a major, huge, crazy, positive feedback spike, LH, then boom, ovulation. So if someone's undergoing fertility treatment, maybe they have cystic ovaries or something like that, the doctor's going to give you what? One of two things. They're going to give you luteinizing hormone, and if that doesn't work, maybe they'll give you GHRH. Maybe you've gone through that, or you know someone who has. Right? You don't have to raise your hand, but if you've had cystic ovaries, I mean, we could probably poll and get a pretty good population out of here. What that means is your eggs get ready to ovulate, but they don't. And so you just have these big kind of fluid blisters, which can be painful if they get too big. And so the doctor, if they give LH, all those follicles will. LH will be in the birth control mix. So the female, nice positive feedback for leading up to ovulation, but it also leads to the synthesis of more feminine type hormones, estrogens and progesterone. Those will be in the, I don't know that LH is in the pill, if you will. So I don't know that LH is I'm going to retract my agreement with you. Luteinizing hormone I don't think is the birth control. But if you take the pill, or something your partner does, they're getting a dose of estrogen, progesterone, which would be released after luteinizing hormone. Which
someone can pill like tricks your body into thinking you're pregnant.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what it does. And here, I'll just address it since we're here. If you take the pill, right, you're supplementing your normal reproductive cycle hormonal pathway. When you take estrogen and progesterone, these are normally released at elevated levels during pregnancy. And most specifically, this hormone called progesterone, it comes from the thing we just mentioned called the CL, the corpus luteum. The yellow body produces a hormone called progesterone. Progesterone has to be present for the pregnancy to be maintained. So as long as the CL is there on the ovary and pregnancy happens, that hormone pathway tells the body, keep baking.
Yeah.
Making baby. Okay? Basically, right, for a simplistic view. As long as progesterone is there, the uterus thinks a baby is, fetus is growing and present. If a fetus is present, can another egg be ovulated and fertilized?
Unless it's simultaneous?
No.
I'm thinking of twins.
Well, I mean, that would be a pregnancy. Yeah, but no, if you're not pregnant and you take progesterone and your body thinks you're pregnant, can you get pregnant? No. Hypothetically, no, but how many of us are birth control babies?
Now, I used to have a problem where I didn't have menstruation and they gave me progesterone to make it start.
To kind of kickstart the pathway, something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways to kind of get into the pathway, if you will.
When you get
I call that a blessing in disguise.
It makes you kind of gain weight. Like
Yeah, perimenopausal, yes.
I was gonna say, I thought when I learned about it, I thought that it was when you become pregnant, there's a hormone that's released that tells your body pretty much that you're pregnant and it doesn't ovulate and do all that. Period.
That hormone is called progesterone.
Yeah.
it's just so much fun. Nah, not really.
Is that true that a female can get pregnant if her so-called tubes are tied?
Yes.
They can untie.
Yes.
No, I'm not, I mean while they're tied.
Yes. Those would be considered to be ectopic, so the pregnancy would occur outside the uterus, and it's very life-threatening to the mother. And it's extremely unlikely that the fetus would even survive because of the nutrition sources in there. So it's very lethal, but it can happen. They actually ligate them. Actually, they should. I guess I could go back.
You have to burn them now for it to be
Effective cauterizing. So in the female, luteinizing hormone promotes the growth of what's called a follicle. Basically, kind of gets, for lay terms, it gets an egg ready for ovulation, and then it causes the egg to ovulate. Okay? And then after the egg is ovulated, it makes the hormones that maintain pregnancy before the fetus can kind of take over the maintenance of the pregnancy. Okay, so these hormones are there to say, I know you're just a little two-celled something, let me help you out and make sure the uterus doesn't kick you out. In the male, luteinizing hormone has a similar hormone-producing effect. It acts on these interstitial cells. Remember I said it's called interstitial cells. It causes these cells in the testes produce what? Testosterone.
If a woman didn't have any testosterone at all, what would that do to her body?
Yeah, a lack of testosterone would lead to a lack of estrogens, because testosterone would be a precursor to estrogens. Tissues wouldn't be maintained, tissues would be weak. I think it would be I'm going to speculate, very debilitating.
Right.
I don't know if there's a real scenario of that or not. Certainly I could probably say yes, there is. But what it is, I don't know.
Right.
But I think it would be very evident to that person. Very fine, frail structure. Good. All right, so luteinizing hormone is one type of gonadotropin. There's another type of gonadotropin. It's called follicle-stimulating hormone. It must do what?
Stimulate follicles.
Follicles of the
Working
of the ovary. Gonadotropin, so it acts on the gonads. So our second gonadotropin is called follicle stimulating hormone. It gets its name also in the female. So it targets the follicles of the ovary, which helps develop our what? The female eggs, basically. Or in the male, develop the sperm cells. Follicle stimulating hormone, gonadotropin. How do we regulate it? Tropically, by the hypothalamus releasing gonadotropin releasing hormone. So we said the targets would be ovaries and the testes. And this same rule applies, and I don't want to spiral off in our conversation, but generally ovaries, who has them? Females. Generally, males, testes. But we know that there's, right, there's always exceptions to the rule, including the presence of one or both or none of the gonads. And what do you think the function of follicle stimulating hormone is?
Make eggs and sperm.
Just the manufacturing of the gametes. Production, maturation of the gametes. You can say ammaturation, because that's any more clear for the female. Maturation of the oocytes, the eggs. Maturation of the sperm cells.
And maturation.
And maturation. Production, making them and maturing them.
So wait, which one comes first, maturing or the?
Depends on the female.
Okay.
Female, the oocytes are already, they're paused, they're metaphase, they're getting ready to go into meiosis 2. So they're paused, they're already made. So just got to mature them. And the male, they need to be produced and matured. So it depends on the gender. That actually summarizes each of our hormones from the anterior pituitary. What we identified is they are all tropically regulated, at least by the hypothalamus, from the different releasing and or inhibiting hormones. We talked about first prolactin and growth hormone. Then we talked about thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and our gonadotropin, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone. Those are our anterior pituitary hormones. We have about 5 minutes left. Your notes continue on, so very good. Let's go ahead and just keep on keeping on. So we're moving out of the brain. And we're going to move to a familiar gland called the thyroid gland. You should see figure 6.8a in your textbook. The thyroid gland is in the neck. And you should be able to palpate it. It's kind of a soft tissue. And it shouldn't be real buoyant. And it shouldn't be, right, unless there's been a disease or something, it should be palpable. You should be able to feel it, but you shouldn't see it in a healthy situation, a void or fluid filled. The thyroid gland is complex. It's actually going to release 2 types of hormones, more than the one that we've actually studied. And it has on the backside of another set of glands. So in this neck area, we're going to look at 3 hormones instead of just the one that you may be familiar with. The first hormone we're going to look at is called thyroxine. You may noted from your pre-lab last week, we talked about T3, T4. What is it? Is it T3? Is it T4? Is it thyroxine? What is it? The technical names here, T3, T4. The number indicates the number of iodine atoms attached, 3 or 4. 4 is called tetraiodithyronine, and 3 is called triiodithyronine. You can just call it thyroxine, okay? The specifics, yes, are important, but if we can just understand the overall, I'm happy with that. Just for your information, T4 is made in abundance. secreted into the circulatory system and then converted into T3. So if you want to circle, they consider the more active one is T3. And as soon as it's turned to T3, its half-life decreases significantly. So T4 is produced the most because it's more stable, and then converted into T3, just lose an ion. And now it's less stable but reactive. A brief description. Do it. For work. Yeah, T3 is the one that does the bulk of the work. But once it's converted to T3, it's very, its half-life is decreased, right? So as soon as it's produced to T3, we need to bind it with the receptor, etc. T4 can circulate. I don't remember the half-life difference, but significantly longer than T3 can. So how do you think we're going to regulate it? Tropically, by the anterior pituitary releasing thyroid stimulating hormone. And then we can back it up, which is also tropically regulated by hypothalamus. So if I want to release T3 and T4, I need to see the presence of TSH from the anterior pituitary. Thyroxine, where does it target? Lab last week, quiz this week. Most of our tissues to enhance metabolism. It also enhances our sensitivity to what? What is my abbreviation here? Sympathetic nervous system. Under the influence of thyroxine, our body is more sensitive to epinephrine, norepinephrine, which makes sense. What happens under the sympathetic nervous system? We set our fight or flight, so our energy use goes up, heart rate goes up, respiration rate goes up, energy, nutrients leaked into the blood to power gas, right, etc. Another hormone important not only in adulthood like we see, but also during early fetal growth. Very important throughout one's life. We're going to conclude our discussion here and then pick up the rest of this presentation on